Hello YouTube, this is Veteran Mountain Man coming to you again with the United States Constitution's amendments, and today we're going to discuss some very important amendments, including some of the worst ever created amendments. Many of you will not realize what I'm talking about until after we go over it, because we're starting at the 16th Amendment today. And most people don't know what the 16th Amendment was. Well, the 16th Amendment was the first real victory of the progressive movement in the United States. And the progressive movement is a cultural Marxist movement. Now, this movement was basically, the 16th Amendment was basically put together by the Prohibitionist movement, the Women's for Temperance movement, the Women's for Suffrage movement, the KKK, and the modern Democrat Party. The 16th Amendment states, "The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on income from whatever source derived without apportionment amongst several states and without regard to any census or enumeration." Basically, the original statements in the Constitution stated that taxation had to be apportioned fairly based off census. And so certain states were responsible for certain amounts of the federal debt based on their population. This amendment changed all of that. Prior to this amendment, most money brought into the federal government was brought in on excise taxes, sin taxes, and tariffs with trade. This allowed the country to dismiss sin taxes and set up the Prohibitionist movement. Now, the 17th Amendment changed the way that senators work. It was ratified in 1913, and it basically put the senators into direct populace elections, so that senators were selected by the population of the state and not the state's representative legislature. So that was not a bad bit of legislation there. Then we come to the 18th Amendment. And this is the second one in this group that was extremely bad idea. The 18th Amendment, Section 1 states, "After 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors within the importation thereof into or the exportation thereof from the United States, and all territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited." Now this was adopted in 1919. This is what caused the speakeasy movement and the massive lawlessness of the 1920s. Section 2 of this amendment states, "The Congress and several states shall have concurrent power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation." Section 3 states, "This article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by the legislature of several states as provided within the Constitution within 7 years of the submission date." So they put a sundowner on it. Well, unfortunately, the sundowner was Max nix, much nothings in German, because it was presented to Congress in 1917 and it was ratified in 1919. And it just barely went to 1919 for ratification because it was submitted December 18th of 1917. And by January 16th of 1919, it was ratified. So it was really just a little bit over a year. Not even 2, even though it appears to be 2 if you just look at the ratification years. But that was one of the worst amendments to the Constitution that we ever made. So, the 19th Amendment, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So this one right here is one of the what's called civil rights amendments. And as you can see, this one was pushed through once again by the Progressive Party. It was presented to Congress June of 1919 and was ratified by August of 1920. So all of those progressive articles were forced through within a period of 10 years. And it all started with the 16th Amendment, which allowed them to collect taxes based on any criteria they selected. Once again, the taxation was passed in 1913, and by 1920, we had a completed suffrage movement. This was the first wave of feminism that is known in the United States. And as you can see, it even had a Marxist overtone. Now, does that mean that it was a bad thing? Well, no. I think women voting is a very good thing. I think tax controls being removed was a bad thing. I don't mind sin taxes. Sin taxes usually only affect those that are willing to sin. Now, granted, that does disproportionately affect lower classes, because lower classes are far more likely to consume sins at a higher volume. However, that's personal choice. But I don't like the quote-unquote progressive income tax system, because it actually isn't progressive, and it actually just taxes rich people more. It is a Marxist idea through and through. Now, the 20th Amendment was a return to sanity. The 20th Amendment actually made alterations to portions of the 12th Amendment. It created the alteration of January 20th as to the election, as to the swearing in of the president and vice president, and the third day of January to be the swearing in of senators and representatives. It changed it so that Congress will assemble once a year, and it shall be on the third day of January, unless apportioned differently by law. And it affixed the president and vice president's term as starting at the time they're sworn in. It also stated that the vice president shall follow the president should something happen to the president. Section 4 gives details on what would happen should the president and vice president pass. It states when the sections will take effect, which was the 15th day of October, following the ratification. And it also gave a sunset of 7 years for ratification of the amendment. Now, realistically, they should have passed an amendment ratifying how long amendments could sit out there. But instead, they've continued to add these sunset clauses to the amendments. We're going to cover one last update here, and this is the 21st Amendment. And it stated that the 18th article of amendment of the Constitution is hereby repealed, and gave allowance for the production, distribution, and consumption of alcoholic beverages again. And this one was passed and ratified in 1933. In fact, it didn't even leave 1933. They started it in February. By December, it was done. They once again put a sunset in this, but the sunset was really not necessary because they give a total of 7 years. Well, that's it for today. We covered the 16th through the 21st Amendment. I will include a link to constitutionus.com so you can read these if you'd like to, as well as a link to the National Archives, a link to amazon.com where you can buy an ebook copy, and a link to my minds.com/Veteran Mountain Man account if you'd like to discuss this with me. Remember, we need to be keeping an eye out on the progressive agenda because they tend to make very bad decisions when it comes to political ideas. I mean, they were the ones who pushed prohibition and income taxes on us after all. And while not everything they do is bad, a lot of what they do is suspect. Thank you all again, and have a good day.